back to Code Glancer. So in today's video what we are going to discuss, I have listed down all the questions in the beginning itself. So we are going to discuss today what is testing, how can we test the Spring Boot application, how many ways we can write the test cases in Spring Boot, and what are the tech stack needed to write the test cases, difference between unit test case and integration test case. Then we are going to discuss different ways to write the test case for controller classes. Some of the people get confused writing the test cases for controller, so I am going to discuss that, and then I am going to discuss what is mocking and why do we need mocking. So without wasting the time, let's start today's video. So in previous video we have written a bunch of codes related to controller classes, service classes, and then the repository classes, but we have not written any of the testing classes. So in today's video we are going to discuss all of these parameters, so please stay tuned, and this is going to be very crucial videos and it will help you to write a better code, and it will also help you to write the code which will be always a stable code. Again I am saying which will be the stable code. So let's continue till the last the videos. Okay, thank you for watching this video. Let me start the process now. So the first question is, what is testing? So testing is a crucial process in the software development, as you all know, that involves evaluating a software application to ensure that it functions correctly and meet its requirement. What is the meaning of this line? Like, so whatever the method or whatever the code you are writing, that should meet the whatever the functionality you have written. Okay, so that is nothing but testing. So how, there are how many ways we can write the uh, test test for one application. So in our case this is going to be Spring Boot application. Okay, so if you are writing the code, there can be different ways to write the test cases. So in Spring Boot application, first way to write the test case is JUnit. So otherwise we can say the unit testing. So what is unit testing? If you have written any method, okay, so that particular method testing is called the unit. So you are going to only test one unit of the block. So let's say I have here one service class. So this service is having, let's say its name is candidate service. So here if you see, I have a create candidate method, and then I have a get candidate and find candidate by email. So this is one interface and it has three methods. So there must be some implementation where I must have written some code. So this is one method, this is one method, this one method. So how will you test this? Writing the JUnit test case. So JUnit means like I am going to just test okay, this functionality. I am not going to test other thing of this class, right? So this is one method, and if you see here what it is doing, it is just doing some conversion here, like DTO to domain class object, and then it is calling a repository class to save, and again DTO to again it is just converting the domain class to DTO class, and then it is returning. So if you see here, this part is like static. It means this is only converting it. But if you see here, this one candidate repository, so candidate service is having one dependency of call the candidate repository, which is responsible for talking to the database. So I can say that if you are a developer or tester, you must have come across these kind of requirement. Okay, and if you are especially a developer, Java developer, so you must have to write some test case for this. And when you write a test case for particular one code, that is called the unit testing. So unit testing means you are going to test the functionality of this method. So if there are anything which is not related to this class, so what is not related to this class? This candidate repository is not related here, candidate mapper is also not related, right? But we have some set of steps. Okay, so we are just going to test this set of steps, but what is happening inside the candidate repository.save method, we are not going to test that one. We are going to just test whatever the steps it is written here. So this is called unit testing basically. So in Java we have a way to write the unit test case. So I will discuss once I finish all the types of testing. So now let's jump to the another testing. So what is the integration testing? So integration testing means when you have written some kinds of APIs. So from starting to ending. So let's say I have written one API called candidate controller, where I have written an API to create the candidate, which takes some inputs and create the candidate. So what it does, like it will take some input like what is the candidate name and all, so these kind of input, and then what it will do, it will call the internal services and it will create into the database. But it is not like we are doing one part of the testing. It is like I am going to test the complete API. So this is called why integration testing means all the component. If you see here, this is a controller is dependent on service, and if you go to the service is dependent on the repository. So you are not going to test only one particular thing, you are going to test complete end to end. That's why it is called integration testing. So I will discuss how to write the integration test case in the Spring Boot application. If you have written any sort of okay APIs, so how will you do it? So you must, that API must be using database, and that API must be dependent on some other another API. So for that I will tell you how you will write the integration testing. Then comes to the functional testing. So nowadays this is also kicking a place in the market, because for writing the functional test case, it is not necessary that you must be a developer. Okay, nowadays many of the business analyst person are also writing the integration test case. So sorry, functional test case. So functional test case, I will discuss how to write it. Basically I will use BDD method to write the functional test case, and I will be discussing karate framework. Basically karate is not mentioned here, but I will just write it like karate framework, right? So karate is one framework which is written on the top of Cucumber, and it's a very easy to write the functional test case. So what is the functionality? So when you write any API, so API will either create and then it will return 201 as a HTTP status code, or it will be okay. So these kind of testing will be done through the functional testing. Now come to the performance testing. So what is the performance testing? So let's say you have written any API. Okay, let's say create candidate. So at any moment, okay, so how much load you are going to give to that API? Let's say in 1 second, how much request that API is going to process. So if you want to test, so you must have written your application keeping some of the detail in your mind, like at one time how many concurrent requests my server can handle. Okay, and if there are more load coming, okay, how my application should behave. So if you want to test these kind of scenarios, then you must have to write the performance testing. So generally developer do not do the performance testing. There will be in most of the companies performance testing teams who will do these kind of things. But as a developer, it's good to know the writing the performance testing. So I will here discuss JMeter uh, as a tool to write the performance testing for any application. All right. So next is coming to the security testing. So basically this is also nowadays a lot of people asking in the interview to write the security testing. So basically if your application is having, let's say, some jars, okay, so that jar must can be vulnerable. Okay, so vulnerabilities can be found using some kind of scan tools. So basically nowadays, okay, you must know sometimes before there was one log4j2 vulnerabilities found, so that was related to the jar issue, so that also come under the security testing. Then there are different mechanism, like you must be aware with the SQL injection, cross-site scripting, authorization and authentication. So all of these I will be discussing in detail in the sequence. So here I have a good hands-on experience on one of the tool. Its name is Sync. So I will integrate that in my project, and I will show you like how the security testing okay is performed for finding any third-party related vulnerabilities into the code. Now coming to the code coverage analysis. So once you write the code, okay, so how much coverage is in your code means if there is any duplicate code, or whatever the if block you have written, whatever the loop you have written, those are properly written or not, if there is any unused code. So you want to analysis all those kind of things. So you have to also write some codes, or maybe if you are not do not want to write the code, you have to use correct build plugins tool, so that it can analyze your code and it can generate the report, and that can be part of your build steps basically, so that it can tell you, or it will ensure like no developer will push bad code means when it is having any issues rec- rectified by the code coverage analysis tool. So in this case I will be discussing Jacoco as one of the code coverage analysis tool. Then come to the continuous integration and continuous deployment basically. So this is nothing but doing your testing whatever you have written as part of performance testing, maybe functional testing, maybe integration testing, maybe, or maybe the JUnit testing. So all of these can be done through one of the step, that is like continuous integration. It means in GitHub or GitLab, whenever you push some code, right, so automatically one pipeline should run, okay, and that will ensure like whatever the steps you have written, so all of those steps are passing, so that will come under the continuous integration tool. So I will discuss here some GitHub actions, and I will show you how to set up the CI/CD pipeline and how to execute this test scenarios. Now coming to the manual testing, so everyone must be doing this manual testing. So let's say you have written some APIs and you want to test it, so how will you test it? Okay, so for testing that we have uh, some clients tool, like I generally use Postman. So I will be discussing here how to write the Postman script sometimes, because let's say you have a two steps testing you want to do. So in first step something is created, and for that response is going to be in the second step. So you have to write some pre-script and post-script. So I will be discussing here Postman tool as part of that. So now let's discuss how to write the unit test case for the your application. So remember we were working on the interview scheduler application. As part of that we have written the candidate controller, and it is having the candidate service. So let's say for this candidate service I want to write the unit test case. So in Java, for writing the unit test case we have a choice of software called JUnit. So for writing the JUnit test case as a dependency in your pom.xml, what you have to do, you have to just add as one of the starter dependency of the Spring Boot, like it is called starter test. And if your Spring version is latest, it will automatically pull the JUnit 5. All right, so only thing is like you have to add this one, and this will starter dependency will always pull JUnit related jar as well as Mockito related jar. Okay, so in the starting of the questions I was saying that why the Mockito is required or why mocking is required. So if you see here, I want to test this candidate service IMPL class which is having one method called create candidate. Okay, so if you see here, this candidate repository is like one of the dependency which is injected through at the rate auto wire, right? So this is like a dependency. So but if you see, candidate service IMPL does not know how to save data in the database, right? So this is called one dependency, and for any dependency we have to mock it. Mock means like it will create just one dummy class, and whenever it is needed it will be used. So for mocking of the data in Spring Boot, we have a Mockito as one of the tool which we can use it to mock it, right? So let's jump to the test cases. So first let's come to the service. So here you can see I have written one candidate service test case. So for simplicity, like I have already written these test cases to save your time. Okay, so let's start it. So what is the first step to write? So if you see here, this is like candidate service IMPL class. So you have to similarly write here candidate service test. Okay, and if you see here, I have written, this is a very important annotation here, at the rate context configuration, so which is taking basically classes. So how many classes you want to load as part of this as part of this unit test cases, because if you do not give here context configuration, in some cases it will load your complete packages, which will result into time consumption. Okay, so if I want to test only the candidate service, my test case should be loading only the candidate service related jar. So if you go to here, how many classes it is loading? It is having the usage of candidate repository and candidate mapper and candidate service. That's why when I am writing the candidate service test case, I have written at the rate context configuration, and these two classes are used in my programs, right? Candidate service IMPL and candidate mapper IMPL. That's why these two are part of context configuration. And then you have to write at the rate context with spring extension dot class. So this is responsible for running your application, uh, running your test case here. So now let's say forget about all of this implementation. So let's say I have a candidate, a create candidate method. So I just written here public void and test underscore whatever the method you have. So if you see, this method is taking one candidate DTO, right? So for writing this one, what I can do, I just written one test case here, test case method. Okay, and so this is needing one candidate DTO, right? So I have to create one candidate DTO class. So instead of creating this candidate DTO class, what I am going to do here, I am just going to write here one method, right? Which method is giving me candidate DTO with some hard coded value, because this is a testing. So each time this value will be used here. So if you now come to here in this case, so now we have a expected candidate which I am just going to validate. Okay, so now if you see here, the main part is this line, right? Like I have to test which class. So I have to test this candidate service IMPL class. So for testing this candidate service IMPL class, I have written here at the rate AutoWire candidate service IMPL class, and then at the rate AutoWire candidate mapper. Why candidate mapper is AutoWire here? Because if you see here, candidate mapper is the one interface which is auto generated interface, and there is a no dependency. So this is like one kind of static class, you can say. So that's why this is auto wired, okay, because there is a no dependency, it is a self contained class. So these two will be auto injected by the container. But if you go to candidate service impl, candidate mapper can be auto wire, but candidate repository, okay, candidate repository, from where it will come, like whatever the code is written, that code I just want to mock it, because here how it is going to interact with the database we don't know. That's why in this case we have written at the rate mockbin. So what at the rate mockbin will do, it will mock the candidate repository, right? So if you go to, so now for writing any test cases, so I have a test class, and what are the dependencies? So there are two dependencies, so all of these two dependencies first of all I have injected. So if I want to mock any dependency, I have to use at the rate mockbin. If I want to directly inject a dependency, so I have to write at the rate autowire. So these two I have written autowire, and this one I wanted to mock it. All right. So now with this we are able to understand, if in any of the class if there is any dependency, first of all we have to mock it, and if that is like self-contained class, we can write it as a auto wire. So this is the class we have to test, candidate service impl. That's why I have written its name as a under test service. So now in this class, what is the method we have to test? So the first method is create candidate, right? So if you see here under test dot create candidate I have to call, right? So if you go to the create candidate method, it is taking the candidate dto. So now this candidate, to get this candidate dto, I have just written one method which is returning the candidate dto. So this is candidate dto dot builder, and with this all of parameter I am just building this, and I am calling under test service dot create candidate with this input. So whatever the input I have given, it will go here and it will save the data. But if you see this candidate repository dot save, I have not given here like which database to connect, okay, and then which table to save. So for that reason, since this candidate repository is mocked class, right? So whenever this is getting called, we have to just respond with some other response. That's why if you see here, we have to write something like this. This is by using the mockito. So this is the power of mockito. So when mockito.when candidate repository.save on any mockito.any of the candidate dot class, I am saying, okay, so on candidate repository.save with any class of candidate instance is getting called, please return this expected candidate. So this is the case, right? So what is it is returning? So it is returning the candidate, one of the candidate class. That's why it is written here as a mock. So this is like when, right? So this is when candidate repository dot save is getting called on any of the candidate class, then return this. So this is line here. All right, and then I am preparing the input, and then finally I am calling the test method under test dot create. So if you see here, when it will go here, so whatever the input I am giving, this input is converted into the candidate, and the candidate repository.save method is getting called. But since I have given here mockito.any reference of candidate class is getting called, then return the whatever return I have given. So what will happen? It will give whatever I have given here. That's why I am calling resultant candidate. So now I have a expected candidate what I have given here, and I have a resultant candidate. So now we have to just do some kind of assertion. So whatever the value I am giving here, that is coming, or is there any alteration, right? So if you see expected candidate, what I am giving, Rohan Kumar, address is Facer, email is contact.rohan at codeglancer.com. So these are the details. So if you see here, now first of all I am saying assertion dot assert not equal, right? So not equal because whatever the candidate resultant candidate I am creating, that should not be null. So this is one assertion I am doing here. Then second assertion I am doing is like whatever the candidate is having. So if you see expected is how much, expected is the contact rohan at the rate contact dot rohan at the rate codeglancer.com. So this is the email id, and whatever the resultant will come, same will come here. Why I am saying? Because at the rate expected I am giving the same. If you see here, this is the same one. All right. So using this I am able to okay, so first is the asserting the value. So this is here like I am on the complex object, I am asserting like it is not null. All right. And then I am on one of the value of this like get email, I am asserting this two value for the equality. Okay. Then one more thing I am saying, right? Like candidate repository. So in this method, if you see here, we have a candidate repository dot save method. So how many time in this method this is getting called? So if you see, this is getting called only one time, exactly one time. So that's what I just want to validate that also. That's why it is like mockito.verify. But if you see here, this is a static import. That's why mockito.verify is not here. So mockito.verify candidate repository and then times. So how many times it is expected to be called? So this is expected to be called only once. That's why here we have a one dot save on what object? So this is going to be candidate object. If you go inside this, this is a candidate object here. All right. So using this I am successfully able to write one JUnit test case. Okay, so what are the things to consider here? So first of all, for writing any JUnit test cases for any class, you have to see how many instances are there which can be mocked and which can be basically directly injectable. Then you have to see in your code what are the methods which are not related to this class, okay, which are coming from the mocking. So in that scenario you have to write some action when and then. So when this is happening, like this method is getting called, then return this. And then you have to write the test case, you have to call this method and you have to do some assertion. So using this we can complete the mock JUnit test case for any of the service class, or you can say the business class. So this is when part, this is the test pass, and this is the assertion part. Similarly, let's say we have a find find candidate by email. So if you see here, this is one liner method. Okay, and what it is doing, it is taking one email id and then it is trying to find the from the database and then it is returning the candidate. So let's say I want to write the find candidate by email, right? So this is one test case I want to write. So first of all you have to write at the rate test and then public void test underscore. So this is the naming convention I generally follow, test underscore whatever the method you have, right? So if you see here, in this case also what we are doing, so this line is not required actually. So okay, yeah, this line is required basically because if you see here, if you go to inside this method, so whenever the candidate repository dot find by email method is getting called, what we have to do, we have to return one candidate, right? So if you see here, that's why I have written here when condition. So this is again going to be when condition, right? So when mockito.when candidate repository dot find by email on any instance of string, because if you see here, this is like email. So email can be any string. So any string, then result is then return this. So this is expected candidate. So this part is done. And then second part is like this is to be tested. This is like to be tested. So I am just writing here, this is like to be tested line. So this method is going to be tested and this is like assertions, right? So this is going to be assertions line. right? So now once this is created, I am just saying like this is not null, because uh, I have already written here logic, right? Whenever inside this method candidate repository dot find by email is getting called, return the expected result. Okay, so we will see this one. What else we can do? So we can just copy this and assert. We can do equality. So if you see here candidate repository dot, I can assert the name basically. So first of all we have to give the expected. So here is the expected. So expected dot get name, and then here we have a resultant dot get name, because whatever I am expecting that should be coming as a resultant. So this is basically unit test casing. So let's run this method and see how it is working. So meanwhile it is loading. This should be quick. I'll explain you couple of things while running this method also. So if you see here, these two are test cases what we have written, and whatever the assertions we have written, and those are getting passed. So now if you see here, in this case the complete Spring Boot application is not getting loaded, only the load is happening for the required classes. And this is the magic of this annotations, basically at the rate uh, context configuration class. Otherwise lot of classes will be loaded. So if you see here we have lot of classes here, right? Like we have classes for all this controller, and then we have all the classes for candidate service, then Gmail service, interview service, IMPL. But as part of this unit test case, right? So I am not expecting to load all the classes. If I load all the classes, the if I load all the classes, what will happen? The application will will be little slow, because for each test case it is going to load all the classes, right? So this is called basically unit test case. So you can even write for the negative scenario. So in the next video I may be writing some of the negative scenarios for this one. So with this I am concluding the unit test cases. So I am just going to summarize here. So if you want to write the test case for any service class, okay, or any other class, you have to find out how many dependencies are there in that class, and how many those dependency you have to mock it. So for that you have to use the mock bin. If those are like static kind of classes, so you can use the auto wire, okay. And then whatever the test method you have to write, you can just use auto wire. And you can, for each method inside this class, you can write one test case, and you need to ensure so whatever it is written that is working. So this annotation is whatever the test annotation is, right? So this is coming for org.jupyter API, and this is also called JUnit Jupyter. And then if you see Mockito, so this is coming from the Mockito jar basically. So we have written the unit test cases with help of two framework. One is the Mockito framework, which is used for mocking anything, and another one is JUnit test case for writing the JUnit test, right? So with this I am concluding this one. Now I am going to write one integration test case, and then I will tell you like what is the difference between integration test case and unit test case. All right. So if you see here, I have a candidate controller integration test case. So now if you come to the candidate API, so there is a candidate controller, okay, so which is like slash candidate, and here we have a post mapping which is like just going to create one candidate. Then we have another method slash candidate and slash email basically. So what it is going to do, like slash candidate slash email, so this one is like get candidate API. So this is going to return you one of the candidate if this email exists, right? So for doing this, how will you write the test case? So for writing the integration test case in Java, right, or Spring Boot. So if you see, this is one API. So for calling any API, how you call any API from the Java application, so you must be using REST template or you must be using web client. So in this example I am going to tell you how to write the integration test case, right? So integration test, for writing the integration test case, you have to consider some of the parameters. Okay, so what is the parameter? So if you see here, this application internally must be connecting to any database, right? So in real time it must be some RDBMS database like Postgres or Oracle. But as a developer, that will not be used for writing the test cases, because if you insert into the real database some test data, it may break the functionality. So it's always better to use in memory database. And in Java we have a in memory database called as a h2 database. So I will tell you like what is the first step for the h2db. So first of all, you have to go to your pom.xml and you have to add one dependency. So if you see here, this is one of the dependency of com.h2db, and artifact id is h2db, and scope is here test. It means this is only getting used at the time of testing. But if you see here, I have another jar which is the Postgres jar. So this is actually getting used in my application. All right, so now if you want to see this one, how I am going to write the unit integration test case, first of all you have to understand how this candidate controller is working internally. So this candidate controller is exposing one of the API, and that API internally is talking to some database, right? So we with this we can understand we have to find out a way to call the API, and we have to also provide some way to persist the data. So now let's jump to the integration test case. So here basically I have given the package name as a interview scheduler dot integration, and all the integration test case means all the API test case will be here. So first controller is like candidate controller, so I have given candidate controller integration test case. Okay, so in this case your complete Spring Boot application is going to be started. All right, so that's why, so like whenever you run your Spring Boot application, it must be starting on some port number, right? Like 8080 or something, like Tomcat is must be starting. So this Spring Boot annotation is sufficient to expose your APIs as a REST API, and it can use any of the random ports. So that's why if you see here, I have given environment and port number here. Okay, so what is this active profile? So basically this active profiles tell us to use some kind of configuration where the profile name is test. So if you come to here, application hyphen test dot properties, I have put in resources folder, which is having some sort of configuration. So data source name URL is like h2db URL, and then driver class name, username, password. So this configuration I am going to use for writing this integration test case. So first of all, two annotations you have to remember. First one is the Spring Boot test case. Then we have a at the rate active profiles annotations, and here you have to define one properties file which is having the details of all the data source related variables. Now the important point is like if you have any API, so how are you going to call that API? So for writing that, we have to write the test REST template. So test REST template is available in Spring Boot test framework to just write the test case. So now if you see here, now let's understand what we have written at part of this candidate controller. So in the candidate controller, we have exposed one API slash candidate, and that is like slash post mapping, right? So I will come to here this one. First of all, you have to write at the rate test, and then you have to write one method. So here also you can use test candidate, and then so if you see this method, it is like get by email id, right? Like here it is a path variable. So first of all, I have injected test template, rest template, and after exposing the rest template, by default it will run in the local host. So if you see here, rest template dot get for entity, because this time I am writing for the get method. If you see here, we have a get method. So rest template dot get for entity, and then you have to give the url. So what is the url here? Because this is going to be running on the local host, so I have written like http colon localhost colon, and then whatever the port number. So here this is the port number given, and then you have to write the API name. So this is like slash candidates slash email ID, right? So if you see here, this is a path variable here. So you have to write like slash email. Okay, so the email ID will come, and then like what is the output of this class, right? Like when you are calling the get for entity class, so it takes one url here, and then it takes like what is the result type. So I am saying like the result is going to be candidate dto dot class. Okay, so this once I have given, so what is the response type here? So this is like going to be response entity of object entity. So this is here. All right, so this part we have done. So this time if you see, we are not telling, right, like when mosquito dot mosquito dot when candidate repository dot save method is called, then return this. No, because this is a integration test case. Here everything you have to set up, and it will test your API end to end basically, right? So for doing this, this is done. So now what I have to do, I am expecting that if you go to this method, what it is returning, this is returning status code as a okay. So I am saying okay boss, so I got the response. So now just assert that whatever the status code is coming as part of this response, this is going to be equal to http status of okay. And then I am getting the body, like response entity dot get body. So I am getting the candidate dto. I am just asserting like it is not null, and the name is John Doe, right? So the John, from where this name is coming. So if you see here, so I have not added any data into the database, but I am saying like with John dot doe at the rate example dot com, give me the candidate, right? So how from where it will fetch? So somewhere we have to tell, right? Like somewhere we have to insert it. So for that we have a annotation called at the rate SQL, and it takes like one script, and even you can write here like what it will do. So it will do like there is execution phase. So this execution phase, what we are doing, like before executing this test case, just execute whatever the SQL I have written. So let me show you what SQL I have written. So if you see here, slash SQL insert hyphen data dot SQL. Okay, because I am saying, so this email ID john.doe at the rate example.com, give me the candidate if there is any candidate. But how, from where it will find if I do not have already inserted? So for doing that, I have written one SQL insert into statement, which is basically ID, name, address, email ID, and all of these data I have given. So whenever this test is going to be executed, first of all it will insert one data into the h2db database before running this test case, and then this test case will run, and it will, using the rest template, it will try to get the data, and then once it got the data, it will assert whatever the expectation we are having, right? So this is test case for get API. Now come to the post API. So in the post API, we do not expect any data to be present, right? Like we are going to just create one data. Okay, so that's why, so we are just going to create one data. All right, so in this case what we have to do, so that was something which was not required, so I deleted it. So here rest template dot, so if you see here, we were using the get for entity, now we are using post for entity. So rest template dot post for entity, and then you have to write the API name. So what is the API name? HTTP localhost port number and slash candidate. So this is post API. So if you go to this controller class, we have a post API, right? So at the rate post API, and then it is having one request body, right? So this is the request body part. Like I have written one test response class, which is like just creating one candidate DTO so that I can pass this DTO. Okay. And then what is the result type? So here candidate DTO is the input and candidate DTO is also output. Okay. So with this we will get the response entity of candidate DTO class. So now only thing is like we have to assert it. So if you see here in the controller class, what is here? So this is like HTTP status dot created. So similarly we have to assert here. So whatever the response entity I am getting, response entity dot get status code dot equal, I am saying like it should be HTTP created, and then I am getting the response body as a candidate, and these are two what do you call assertion done. Now another important thing is like this I am doing, that's fine, but apart from that one more thing I am doing. Okay, so rest template I have auto wire, and at the same time candidate repository also I am auto wiring. Okay, so this is not needed always, because even from this you can test it, but just for explanation purpose I have also written this auto wiring of the candidate repository. And if you see here, candidate repository dot find by email id and contact dot rohan at the rate codeglancer.com I am writing here. So it will give me, why it will give me, because if you see, when in this method only I am creating this record, right? So if you see here, contact dot rohan at the rate codeglancer.com I am giving, and it is creating one candidate. Okay, so once this it has created one candidate, so I am just trying to get it from the database and I am going to evaluate it, assert it here, whether it is correct or not. So this is basically called the integration test case. So nothing is mocked here, all end to end testing is happening here. Okay, all right, so let's run this also. So in this case, Spring Boot application will completely run. Basically the Tomcat server will start and everything will happen. So this is very time consuming, because if you write more and more integration test case, your build process will get slow. So always try to write the less number of integration test case and write more and more unit test case for your program. So generally we have to write the integration test case per API basically. So if you see here, these two test cases all are getting passed, and if you want to see the logs, basically like this is the uh, debug log, or okay, so this is the info log and debug log both, because debug is enabled here. So if you see here, first of all it is running the integration test case, and then it is finding the profile active as a test, because we have given at the rate profiles as a test as a active. If you do not give, instead of taking from the test folder, it will take from the main folder of the resources. So it's always better to give the application properties file data from the test if you want to run any integration test case. All right, and if you see here, it is first of all creating the database, like creating the table. So candidate table, feedback table, interview table, talent table, user table. So these all are the tables. So I told you, like when you run the integration test case, your application will start from scratch and it will scan all the classes and it will do all the necessities work. After doing creating all the after creating all the tables, it is trying to add all the constraint, and after adding all the constraint, it is just initializing the Spring Boot application. It is like started Spring Boot application, and if you want to see the port number also, somewhere it must be showing. So if you see here 52758, so this is like random port number it is getting. And if you see here, insert into is also getting called, because as part of first test case we have written one insert statement. All right, so with this we have successfully completed the integration test case, right? So when I will write the authentication and authorization mechanism, I will also tell you how to write the test case with those detail, or you can also learn like how to write the test case for delete method, post method. So currently my API is not having those, so once I have, I will enhance these test case also. All right, so now we have written the unit test case for the candidate service, and then we have the written the integration test case. But one more thing we have not written, that is like unit test case for candidate controller. So most of the people get confused between writing the unit test case and integration test case for the controller classes. So if you compare this controller class with the service class, right? So this service class is also having some dependencies, right? And whatever the code is inside that, and if it is from the dependency, we have to mock it, right? So similarly we can also write the candidate controller test, and here we can again use the mockito, right, for writing the unit test case. So here we have written the integration test case for the APIs, but here I am going to write the unit test case for candidate controller class. Okay, so in this case, as I explained you earlier, you have to write extend with, and whatever the extend with spring extension dot class, and then for which controller you want to test, so you have to write web MVC test annotation with the candidate controller, candidate controller dot class, like whatever the controller you want to test. And if you say the see the naming convention also, so this will remain like I want to test candidate controller, so I will give name as a candidate controller test, right? So if you see here, there is a one dependency of candidate service, right? So I am just mocking it. Okay, remember here I am mocking it, I am not auto wiring. Okay, so I am mocking it, and then ultimately this is a controller class, right? But I want to just perform HTTP operation without worrying about underlying server, how the server is going to work and all. But still I want to verify like whatever the HTTP status it is returning, that is coming or not, and whatever the input I am giving, that is working as per expectation or not. So this, when you will do, let's say you are working on control writing the API, but someone else in your company or some of your colleague is working on the business logic, like let's say service class, and that is not currently available. You have just got the contract of this one, right? Like this is, if you go to this class, this is like just a contract, it is a interface. So in that scenario also you can complete your, okay, unit test case. You will not be able to complete the integration test case, but you will be able to uh, write the unit test case. Okay, so please remember, for controller classes also we can write the integration test case as well as we can write the unit test case. So both are required, and the purpose of writing them is very different. So in this case also there will be very minimal number of classes getting loaded, not all the classes will be loaded. Okay, so now let's start it. So in this case, when you are writing the test case for the controller, you have to use mock MVC, one of the class here, and this is you have to write like auto wire, because this will be automatically coming from the spring, and it has some method using which you can perform the whatever the rest whatever the HTTP method you want to perform. So mock MVC dot perform, and what I am saying, mock MVC request builder dot, I am building a request for what, get. So get, and what is the API name, slash candidates, and then we have a email as a path variable. So here I am giving the path for the email, like contact dot rohan at the rate codeglancer.com. And then what is the content type, so content type is json. And then what I am expecting, I am expecting, okay, so status dot is okay. And then so we have mock MVC result matcher, which is having json path. So basically, like, if you see the return type of this one, so this is having like, what is the here, like if you go to this class, we have a id, name, address. So this consider as dollar. Like if you consider this as an object, so here all of this will come like id. Id is having, let's say, some value as a 1. So if you want to access this, this will be like dollar dot id, right? So this is the way to process the json here. So if you see here what I have written, so dollar dot name means like current object dot name. So what is the name I am expecting? Rohan. Then address, what I am expecting? Address as a facer I am expecting. So this is coming from where? Because I have written here Mockito. Why Mockito? Because I am not giving this time h2db. I am not writing with the @spring boot so that it will scan all the packages. No, these are all things are not happening here. Why not happening? Because this is the unit test case I am doing for controller class, right? So I cannot I cannot do a get operation without inserting data or either mocking it. That's why here I am doing a Mockito operation. So this operation already I have explained you as part of candidate service test, but again I am explaining you at the as a part of candidate controller test. So if you go to candidate controller, so if you go to the candidate controller here, so what is the dependency here? The dependency is the candidate service, right? So candidate service, we have to mock it. And if you see here in the get candidate controller method, what is like candidate service dot get email. So this one we have to write mockito dot when. So if you see here what I have written, mockito dot when candidate service dot get candidate on mockito of any string, then return, okay, this one. So this is basically one test class written, test response builder class, and from where it is coming. All right, so now it's time to perform. So let's say you want to perform other method. So similarly you have to mockito.perform and mock builder dot instead of get you have to do the post here, right? And if you see here while doing the post operation, so in this class what is happening, it is calling candidate service dot create. So when this is calling, you have to do the mocking for this. When candidate service dot create is getting called on any of the candidate dto dot class, then return something like we have done for the candidate service class. So this is the way basically to write the controller unit test case. All right, so let's run this class and see whether it is working or not. So as you can see, the test case is passing. And if you see here, basically there is no profile getting loaded and there is no tomcat also starting on any of the port basically. So this is working very quickly. That's why we have written here what this is, we have written here the unit test case. So with this I am concluding this video. So in this video what we have learned, I am just going to summarize. We have learned what is testing, there are how many ways to write the test cases for any Spring Boot application in Java. So we have discussed unit test case, integration test case, and we have seen how to write the unit test case for service class, how to write the unit test case for the controller class, and then we have seen how to write the integration test case involving the s2db as database. And then also we have learned, okay, uh, how to give the profiles related information from the resource folder and how to insert the data. So with this I am concluding this video, and in the next video I am going to explain you how to do the another testing. So if we come to the video after the unit testing and integration testing, we have a functional testing. So in the next video I am going to explain you how to write the bdt test case, behavior driven test case, behavior driven, this is called development using the karate framework. So in the next video I am going to explain you. Thank you for watching this channel. If you really find this video helpful, please do like and subscribe. It motivate me to make more and more such content. Thank you very much.